Man quits his job to become an F-rank adventurer and an unstoppable force. If you dig my recaps, don't forget to subscribe and smash that notification bell. Around a gloomy castle, a man is violently thrown to the ground, and already exhausted, he breathlessly states that this is his end. Surrounding him, a group of hidden beings remarks that the man has become extremely strong, but the guy insists it's not enough. They say we should pursue our dreams while we are still young, especially for adventurers, since the tool of their trade is their own body. However, there are adults who simply cannot let go of what they desire. At the local adventurers guild, it's the day for the selection of candidates who wish to be promoted to rank E. One of them, named Rick, shows up for the test, and the receptionist Alyssa gets excited upon recognizing her old friend. They worked together in an office, but the guy left shortly after. But the most surprising thing was that he registered with the guild. Rick comments that it's indeed uncommon to start being an adventurer at 30 years old, because most people begin as apprentices at rank F when they are still teenagers. By the way, Alyssa asks what he's been doing all this time, and he says he spent these years training in the mountains with some more experienced companions. Suddenly, a drunk interrupts the conversation and asks if the pretty girl there is free to hang out, to which she awkwardly replies that she's working. The drunk continues to insist, to the point of grabbing her wrist and saying that women should obey men. To resolve the situation, Rick wraps his arm around the guy's shoulder and gives a light slap to his stomach. The man trembles due to the excess alcohol and faints. Finding it amusing, Alyssa hands the guy the card for the rank E test. Upon reading the registration number 79, he starts the day already feeling nervous. Outside, a woman named Rionette asks Rick if he has already registered, and he says after raising his eyes a bit more that he's set to take the test alongside those radiant and voluminous youngsters. Rionette asks if that's a reason to look at her front, but the guy pretends she's imagining things. Inside, the guild adventurers notice the handprint on the drunk's steel armor, while authorities approach and recognize Gommel the Wild Knight, a former rank A adventurer wanted for assault. Alyssa reflects on how Rick handled the guy and wonders if it was he who caused it. Later, during the medical exam for the selection, the evaluators measure the height of candidate number 79 and are surprised to note that the man is already 32 years old, leaving Rick embarrassed as always. Next, it's time for the measurement of magical energy by touching the sphere. When the third candidate discovers it is C+, everyone around is impressed until Rick is called. After some anticipation, the sphere makes a pathetic crackling sound and evaluates the adventurer as F, causing the surrounding candidates to laugh, having never seen someone with such low magical energy. Curiously, after Rick's departure, the sphere cracks. Then begins the brute strength test, where the candidates must direct all their strength in a single blow. The slime sack absorbs any type of attack, so people don't need to hold back. Upon hearing this, Rick remembers the mountain training where his tutor taught that no matter the magic or weapon you are using, the body will always be the foundation of everything. Therefore, if a man can destroy this golden slime sack with his bare hands, he will know he has built a body he can trust. Rick argues that he is not capable of destroying something so resistant, but the instructor explains that this is just the basics, then easily destroys the sack and claims to be able to do it with 200 of these at once. With that said, Rick began his training on the golden slime with 50,000 punches a day, feeling the hell of that time on his skin. Soon the test begins, and the first candidate impresses by using strengthening magic in a kick. The second was a smug and vain duke's son, said to be only 11 years old, with magic equivalent to rank C, a typical child prodigy. So the boy goes on to conjure a magic by reciting an entire poem. With great energy emanating around his body, he casts the third nature composite magic flame elimination. Thus, a ridiculous fireball zigzags towards the sack and dissipates into it. The evaluator is impressed with the young man's genius, while Rick remembers that he also had lessons in third nature composite heat magic. At the time, the instructor threw a fireball capable of ruining an entire mountain. After other candidates have their turn, candidate number 79 is called for the test. Before starting, one of the evaluators notes that Rick cannot expect much growth in his magic at this age because the correct thing is to start practicing from a young age. The evaluator's conclusion is that Rick should give up. Feeling the pressure of the surrounding gazes, he knows he should do exactly that, but still his internal flame burns brighter than ever. One day, while training punches on the slime sack despite his fists bleeding absurdly, he still had 30,000 punches to meet the day's goal, so the teacher recommended that he stop, but he continued until the end. In the end, he knows well that he started much later than the others, but his belief that he can make up for lost time is greater than anything. With this sentiment, he delivers a punch that devastates the slime sack. The brat duke's son grumbles that the guy is stealing the attention that should be his, but he assures he will get back at him in the defensive magic test, which is his specialty. Later in the defensive magic test, Rick manages to defend against a fourth nature composite magic that the kid couldn't, and by this point, everyone was gaping at candidate number 79. With that done, the evaluator announces that he will raise the level and use the fifth nature composite. However, the guy explains that he can only go up to the first nature composite, so the instructor believes he is being underestimated and intends not to hold back in this next attack. Soon he conjures a shock cyclone, a level 5 spell, leaving the other adventurers in disbelief at the outcome. Sylvester Elsernia, a first-class knight of the kingdom, hears the explosion from afar and goes to investigate, as such a large blast shouldn't be part of a test. Upon learning what happened, Lord Sylvester thinks someone is playing a joke on him because no F-rank individual should be capable of what was reported. He then reads the profile of candidate 79 Rick Gladiator, aged 32, and is astonished at the man's age. According to the records, Rick worked for 14 years as a receptionist at the Tiger Road Sinquat Guild branch. After the defensive magic test, the protagonist completed the written exam and finished the tests for the day. Later, talking with Rionette, he confesses that he doesn't know if he did well on the first day, especially since he scored an F in magical capacity. As a consolation, Rionette notes that the young man has improved a lot over the past 2 years. Suddenly, a haughty duke's son appears, calling Rick a commoner. Rick tries to remember the boy's name but fails. Furious, the kid says his name is Fried Diamuit, so Rick asks if he needs help finding his parents. Even more upset, Fried cries, saying today was supposed to be his day to shine, but the old man stole his spotlight in the test. Right behind the boy, Angelica, his older sister, scolds Rick for making her little brother cry. In tears, Fried claims the 40-year-old man mistreated him, so Rick tries in vain to convince them that he's in his early 30s. Ignoring everything, Angelica challenges the man to a duel, throwing a glove at his chest. He picks it up and says that while a noble's daughter might not know doing laundry is hard work. As he picks the glove off the ground, Rionette informs him that this gesture symbolizes accepting the duel, leaving the poor guy with no way out. Without delay, Angelica Diamuit, a second-class knight of the kingdom's knights, drags the opponent to the arena to punish the supposedly 40-year-old rascal, as she puts it. Following Philheim tradition, Angelica proposes that the loser must serve the winner until death. Amidst this, Rick asks what the level of the challenger might be, and Rionette believes that a second-class knight of the kingdom is probably rank B, so she asks the young man to go easy on her. Confused, Rick reminds her that he's the rank F in this story. To reassure him, the woman asks him to remember what he trained for in the past years, but the memories make him even more anxious. As a last resort, Rionette reminds the man that he's part of the Orichalcum Fist, the group that prides itself on being the strongest on the continent. With that said, Rick Gladiator stands up again and heads towards the challenger. Full of herself, Angelica claims she'll go easy on the rookie, drawing her sword and casting a spell. Rick analyzed that she's the type of swordsman who strengthens the body and weapons, but she doesn't give him time to delve deeper into his study, using her instant step ability to pass by him with impressive speed, making him hear the blade close to his ear. She claims to have given a warning strike, but even reducing her speed, the rank F couldn't dodge. Laughing at the old man, Fried reveals that his sister is so fast she's known throughout the kingdom as Angelica the Flash. Then she warns that this time she won't miss on purpose and attacks again with instant step. Ironically, as the attacker approached, Rick noticed that she's extremely slow, easily dodging her without any effort. Jaw-dropping, Angelica thought that only a few first-class knights could react in time to this kind of attack, but believes it was pure luck, so she charges at the opponent again. Once more, Rick can't understand how this woman can be so slow with a nickname like that, considering she must be just a rich daddy's girl who became a knight because of her wealthy father. Suddenly, she trips over a stone on the way, spinning through the air until she plants her sword into the wall with force. Not having anticipated her attack, Rick thinks thinks that ability is incredible, putting his tail between his legs again, not knowing she nearly tripped and lost her momentum. Angelica doesn't want to lose her composure either, so she pretends she spun on purpose. Next, she announces she'll use an ultimate level instant step, a move that impacts her body so much she can only use it 3 times. Rick acknowledges that she's much faster now, yet still seems like a turtle with a cramp. Despite the failure of this attack, Angelica insists on the same tactic and repeats the move, leaving only one more chance with this ability. Persistently, she maintains the strategy until she trips over another stone along the way. Afraid he won't be able to react in time to this change, of course, Rick strikes the ground, isolating the opponent and creating a crater in the soil. Unable to believe what's happening, Angelica asks who this guy is, and he responds that he quit his job a few years ago to try becoming an adventurer, but he will give his all to pursue this career. With that, to the rookie's surprise, the knight surrenders, using the excuse that she'll let this one slide because he managed to avoid her attacks. Not being a fool, Rick Gladiator asks about the agreement that the loser would become the servant, and Angelica uses the greatest speed ever recorded by her to flee the scene. After the victory, Rionette informs Rick that Bruffston and the others are coming to the kingdom at this moment to see how he's doing, and Rick has only bad premonitions about it. In the next scene, the legend of the warrior who faced the supreme monster Kaiser Alcipiat to conquer a treasure capable of granting any wish called the Akashic Records is told. However, this warrior never managed to defeat that mythical creature, and only some child who dreams of being an adventurer will someday obtain this treasure. This is what the legendary warrior believes. Back in the current kingdom of Philheim, the results of the preliminary tests for rank E are about to be announced, and if the magical energy transmitted to each exam card is blue, then that candidate has passed. Tomorrow, all the approved candidates will participate in a simulated battle in the second stage of the exam. Next to Rionette, Rick Gladiator is tense as another failure could mean his definitive withdrawal, given that he is already past the usual age for this. Soon his card begins to glow and fluctuates from blue to red before finally confirming his approval. Upon leaving the room, Rick smells something awful until a young charmer throws his charm at the beautiful maiden in the room, according to his words. He emphasizes that the noble house of Diamuit governs the people from north to south, and he is the eldest son, Raster Diamuit. The nobleman asks the maiden's name, and she responds that she is Rionette Urfeld. Rick also introduces himself, but the nobleman makes it clear that he doesn't care about a middle-aged, lackluster fool. Raster then turns his attention back to the elf and says he lost his heart in the depths of her eyes, so he would like to take her to the northern lands to make her his second wife. As the young man was rubbing the elf's hand, Rick decided to interfere to prevent things from going south for him, so he says that he is the lady's boyfriend and cannot allow such flirtation in front of him. Not believing him, Raster despises Rick's rank F card, to which the protagonist retorts that the nobleman is also no longer a kid to be taking the rank E exam. However, this was the perfect cue for the heir to boast that he passed this level at only 14 years old. In fact, he belongs to rank M and is the examiner of the simulated battle. Full of himself, he shows his credentials and advises Rionette to leave this loser and dine with a real adventurer. The elf laments disappointing the nobleman, but as can be seen, she is in the company of this gentleman. Additionally, she comments that the smell of Raster's cologne is so strong that it causes discomfort. Outraged, the heir of House Diamuit calls Rick a fifth-rate trash and tells him to prepare for the simulated battle, as there he will show the difference between them and knock some sense into the elf's head. After Raster leaves, Rick takes the opportunity to apologize to Rionette for saying she is his girlfriend, but she confesses that the story made her happy, and besides, it resolved the problem. Back at his palace, the heir drowns his sorrows in drink while cursing that guy's life. Suddenly, his brothers come to him in tears, complaining that a 30-year-old commoner made fun of them during the first test. According to the eldest, no one is allowed to make 2 members of House Diamuit cry, so he promises to make the criminal pay. Given that they said the man was older, Rick comes to Raster's mind, who asks his brothers if they remember the man's registration number. Freed only recalls that the number seemed to say the guy was going to die, so the heir laughs upon discovering who it is. A few days later, the time for the simulated battle had arrived, and Rionette asks Rick to go easy on people. He replies that he isn't even capable of going hard, unlike that northern playboy who will end him in this test. Certain that he would be beaten, and the young man begins to cry until a man in front of him introduces himself as Link's Lorot and states that he will be Gladiator's examiner in the battle, as he will be responsible for numbers 50 to 100. With that said, Rick celebrates upon realizing that his registration number 79 wasn't as unlucky as he thought. As if that weren't enough, Link's praises the candidate, saying that the fact he is 30 years old and quit his job to become an adventurer has restored hope for the man who one day wants to be like Rick. Link started as an adventurer at 24 and only got his career going after 30. Therefore, he sees Rick Gladiator as an example of determination. Now 40 years old, the examiner intends to fulfill his dream of reaching rank, although it took him almost 20 years to reach B. With that, Rick enthusiastically greets the man, and although Lynx emphasizes that he will not have a favorite candidate in the exam, he invites Gladiator for a drink after the test. Listening to every word from his hiding spot, Raster waits for the examiner to pass by to approach him. After this conversation, Rick seems much more relaxed for the battle, as a huge weight has been lifted off his shoulders. However, one of the organizers enters the concentration room and informs that Lynx Lorot, the examiner for candidates 50 to 100, has suddenly fallen ill. Given the situation, Raster Diamuit will take over these candidates. Rionette had already suspected there would be some problem, considering that Rick ended up crossing paths with the 3 Diamuit sons. Around him, an adventurer laments Raster being the examiner because he is known as the man of 1,000 skills, a genius who rose to ranka at just 17 years old. As if that weren't enough, he has another nickname that's even worse, the Rankaf Crusher, and they say he harasses candidates every year for pure entertainment. Meanwhile, preparing for the simulated battle, Raster begins to show his claws by defeating a candidate with just one spell. According to him, this is the problem with people of humble origins, they aren't even good for a warm-up. Behind him, an elite guard receives the signal. Desperate Rick Gladiator asks what to do now, despite Rionette not understanding the reason for all the drama. The man remembers that the examiner is a rank A who hates him, not to mention all the people who always said he would fail. So Rionette responds that since other people's words can give or take away the confidence of those who hear them, she says that Rick is a strong man capable of passing the test and defeating the playboy with the spoiled perfume. Ever since Rick decided to become an adventurer, all he's done is succeed. Hearing these words, he feels more motivated to continue his journey without much regret. That is until a hooded kid approaches him and asks to read his fortune for free, saying he saw in Rick a man fighting his own demons who needs some clairvoyance. With nothing better to do, the protagonist accepts the challenge and sits in the chair. As he does, he falls into a magical trap and vanishes. The kid then removes his hood, revealing himself to be freed Diamuit. Rionette, furious, cuts the kid's crystal ball in half, blows up the wall behind him in the process, and grabs Freed by the collar to find out where the adventurer has been sent. When he refuses to cooperate, she cuts half of his eyelashes and warns that next time it will be his eyes. Freed panics and admits it's a teleportation spell that reaches 90 yards, meaning the old man isn't far. Rick ends up behind the test area, where he's greeted by an elite guard and his cronies. Realizing this, the rank F adventurer discovers he is indeed being sabotaged by the Diamuit family. The strength of the men surrounding him is equivalent to rank B, meaning he's about to take a big beating and miss the exam. To make matters worse, the leader of the elite guards can take on rank A warriors. Rick's fate seems sealed, but the Orichalcum Fist appears on the hill before the worst happens. The boss reminds Rick he has a test and asks what the hell he's doing there. The henchmen can't believe they're facing a talking orc. Rick stammers before making up that these men around him are helping him warm up for the simulated battle, so the orc offers to help too. In despair, Rick tells the elite guards to run for their lives, but they don't feel threatened. One of them strikes the orc's head with a hammer, which crumbles without causing any damage. Not satisfied, the man attacks the orc's arm, so the orc breaks his wrist. To everyone's surprise, the monster heals his attacker's hand and explains that there's a lack of balance in weight compensation for a stronger punch, as the body is a completely connected mass that can't be ignored. Hearing these words, the elite guard's leader realizes who these people are. Meanwhile, the Orichalcum Fist boy pulls out his super cannon called Revised Juliet, loaded with magic stones and lead bullets, and announces he'll resolve the conflict peacefully. Then he attacks knocks 3 enemies in front of him, leaving Rick stunned. Lastly, the guards take the orichalcum girl hostage and order everyone to surrender or they'll slit her throat. Rick and the orc warn the man to let her go before something worse happens, and the girl asks her friends what the guy behind her is doing. Rick explains to Alysaret that the man is just trying to play, so she asks what kind of game it is. The guard, losing patience, punches her to keep her quiet, which awakens the child's fury, destroying everything around her with 7th nature composite magic. The guard's leader bows his head and explains that this girl is only 10 years old but is the most powerful vampire mage. After all, she's the demon child of devastation, Alysaret Drakwell. As for the other member, who looks like a boy, his appearance is deceiving. He's a half-elf, half-dwarf, over 50 years old, with techniques a millennium ahead of his time, being the greatest weaponsmith in the world. His name is Mizet Eldwarf, known as the Millennial Workshop. Lastly, the orc possesses unparalleled physical strength, and his intelligence is equally impressive. Able to use all existing support spells, this is Brufston, a Shork the Wise Beast. According to the guard leader, the 3 are rank S adventurers and make up the continent's most legendary group, the legendary Orichalcum Fist. For the first time in his life, the old man saw these 3 with his own eyes, so he drops his weapons and declares he will retire to live the rest of his life in peace. With that said, Alysaret annihilates the remaining guards, while Rick celebrates his chance to take the test. Back with Rionette, the adventurer surprises Freed, who thought the old man was as good as dead, and the elf gets rid of him ruthlessly. Then Lynx appears injured and reports that Raster did this to him. As if that weren't enough, before giving the examiner a beating, the heir asked what his dream was. Coming from humble beginnings, Lynx came from a place where kids want to be adventurers but have no opportunities, so his dream is to open a school for them. Hearing this, Raster locked Lynx up and scorned his attempt to educate society's scum, saying a third-rate teacher will produce students just as rotten. Lynx was furious at this insult, but couldn't respond to the noble. Thinking about this, the examiner asks Rick to give up the exam, not knowing what he's getting into, but Rick has no intention of giving up. Returning to the arena, Raster sees one of his guards fall unconscious, so he deduces that Rick Gladiator is on his way. The noble would love to crush that man's dreams without even allowing him to try, but since he'll have the displeasure of a direct clash, he wonders if he can make rank F suffer in another way, like making hell seem like a playground for that guy. While waiting for that moment to arrive, the noble entertains himself by setting fire to the poor souls during the preparation for the grand event. Amidst all this, Adolf observed the training, not expecting much from a rank A. By breaking the 4th wall, he directly teaches us that the 4 great fundamentals of every adventurer are physical strength, body control, mana quantity, and magical control. Together, these stats dictate the power of the person who possesses them. Arnold has the innate ability to visualize the scores of these fundamentals in other people. To prove his point, he compares the status difference between one of the event participants and Raster, who has such an overwhelming amount of mana that it even hurts the young man's eyes. Looking around with his impaired vision, he sees Rick and can't understand what an old man is doing in a test for kids. However, upon analyzing the stats of the man, Arnold's eyes burn more than ever. Upon arriving at the arena, Rionette is approached by the Adventurers Guild receptionist Alice Granger, who tries to strike up a conversation with the elf for some reason. In a corner of the bleachers, Alysaret calls her friend to watch the event near the Orichalcum Fist. Alice is dumbfounded to see an orc in the arena, while Rionette refuses Mizet's proposal to sit near him to avoid being a victim of the elf dwarf's hand. Since it didn't work out with his friend, he tries his luck with Rick Gladiator's former co-worker, as she has a pleasant and swaying heart. The elf warns that the guy is not to be trusted, then pushes the human to another corner. Brufston asks how the promising rookie of their group is doing, and Rionette informs that Rick will pass this test without major problems. Alice warns that the examiner for this test is a rank A who always overdoes it when dealing with rookies, but even so, the orc doesn't think it's a problem. On the other side of the arena, Angelica eggs her brother on to beat up that idiot who looks 40 until she sees her youngest getting beaten up and arriving beside her. Facing Rick Gladiator, Later, Raster confesses that he was surprised to see the rookie escape his guards, but he didn't expect much from insignificant plebeians like them. Now the old man will face the creme de la creme of the kingdom of Philheim, the self-proclaimed genius Raster Diarmuid. After feeling something strange in his body, Rick questions why the noble became an adventurer, and he responds that he has the talent for it, and that it further boosts his status even though he is an heir. Indignant at the opponent's lack of honor, Rick asserts that he won't allow himself to be defeated by a guy like this. Raster warns that talk is cheap and proves his point by invoking a first nature composite magic, the ice shot. Throwing the icy spear near the protagonist's face, Raster thinks the guy froze in fear and couldn't dodge, but in reality Rick was just staying calm in the face of the challenge, just as Rionette asked him to do before entering the fight. Being honest with himself, he is worried, but is striving to follow the elf's directive. On the other hand, since Rick didn't react, the noble claims he will do as he pleases. Around him, his siblings shout for the eldest to finish off the guy, so Raster invokes a third nature composite magic, the illuminated flame, leaving Rick surprised that the opponent didn't use an incantation for a spell of that level. Despite the roar of the flames, Gladiator remains static in the face of the fire magic. Brufston comments that it was so insignificant that it can't even be classified as an attack against his pupil. Seeing Alice worried, he asks if she knows what the four fundamentals are, and she accurately names them all. Brufston explains that among them, the mana quantity should be developed when young, roughly until the age of 20. Since Rick started this life at 30, the only thing he can rely on is his own body. For this reason, the orc applied specific training to the student aiming at this characteristic, placing weights for him to walk and get physically stronger to compensate for the lack of mana. Meanwhile, Raster conjures the cutting hurricane of fourth nature composite magic and throws it at the examinee. Brufston explains that he taught Rick to develop this body from scratch, while Mizet was responsible for teaching magical control. Elisarette says she just played magic games with Rick sometimes. Lastly, Rionette trained the pupil's body control. By dedicating himself so much to the activities he practiced with the Orichalcum Fist, Gladiator reached the level of an S rank, just like the other members of this organization. At that moment, Raster launches his shock burn, still using fourth nature. Rionette observes that Rick himself doesn't realize the level he has reached, because Brufston made sure to keep the student's feet on the ground like the day the boy couldn't break a rock in half. The orc said even a rank F could do it. In the midst of this, Raster continued applying his sorcery to the candidate with ferocity, despising the third-rate scum that dares to challenge nobility. With all his hatred for the rabble, the rich guy unleashes so many spells that the dust from the explosions fills the arena. Ironically, he admits he went a bit overboard. Regardless, none of this had any effect on Rick, who reappears without significant damage, further irritating the examiner. Consequently, Raster raises the level of the challenge by using physical fortification that boosts his strength and speed. Once again, Rick repels the adversary as if he were an insect, then reflects that he understood Rionette's point about self-control and perseverance. Focusing only on his innate talent, Raster neglected his own development, making him extremely careless despite the enormous amount of mana. With this realization in mind, the rookie declares he will not lose this fight. Even though the situation is not as favorable as imagined, Raster continues to believe that the candidate got away just by luck, so he begins to cast his first enchantment spell, cheering on his siblings in the stands. Using a third composite nature spell, Flame Elimination, Raster hurls a vast layer of flames at his opponent, who easily blocks the attack. This time, Raster can't hide his look of surprise. Mizet explains that Rick used his magic with a high degree of precision to block, because having low mana doesn't mean you can't compensate with excellent self-control. Despite his arrogance, Raster accuses the opponent of being cocky, claiming that all his blocks were pure coincidence. Still confident in his superiority, Raster is forced to use his iron body to take the student's blow, fearing an early demise. Indignant, Angelica comments that her brother is losing to a guy who hasn't even used any physical enhancement. At the same time, Raster finally admits that this guy is stronger than a rank E, but insists that Rick only dodged the attacks by pure luck. Tired of the noble's arrogance, Rick emphasizes the effort it takes for someone not to recognize the opponent's strength, especially since he didn't use any magic in the fight, only his body control. Still skeptical, Raster asks how this guy got so strong in just 2 years considering he's old? Hearing this question from a spoiled rich kid who always had all the opportunities life could offer, Rick feels personally offended. He had endured training where he was trapped inside a dragon's lair until the creature was dead and swam in monster capture fluid until he drowned. Alice asks what this story is about, and Brufston confirms that the guy not only drowned but also died a few other times. However, the orc's healing ability is powerful enough to bring someone back to life if they've just died. This is one reason why Rick is so powerful. After all, he could come back from the dead to continue his body reconstruction training, a regimen not just anyone could undertake. Whether thrown into a precipice or hit by a city-sized rock, Rick could come back to life and continue his training. Raster claims this is all lies because even if such a harsh realm existed, Rick would never have the motivation to go through with it. On the other hand, the novice adventurer asserts that he is just like Lynx, the examiner Raster injured. Despite their age, both still dream big. Disregarding the usual talk about having dreams, the noble questions what the goal is, to which Rick firmly states that he will defeat the world's strongest monster, Kaiser Alcipiad. Freed laughs at this, and his older brother follows suit. Alice remembers that this monster appears in the legend of Hero Yamato, and Brufston adds that Kaiser is the final goal of the Orichalcum Fist. Raster says this is a childish dream, a fairy tale that never existed, but Rick no longer has patience for the noble's arrogance and ignores him. Faced with this, Raster promises to end the fight once and for all. He invokes a 7th composite nature spell called Forest Rope, which restrains Rick's movement. Then he recites his most powerful ability of the 8th nature. As a result, a gigantic wooden golem is created, terrifying the event's spectators. Inside the monster's mouth, Raster mocks the adversary's reaction, who was summoning an air shot. However, as he emphasizes, Rick points out that his opponent may have trained the technique he's using dozens of times, but he trained this simpler technique 100 million times. Everyone around thinks this is a lie, but Brufston explains that it's possible with the use of space-time magic. Anyway, Raster still doesn't believe all this talk and completes the conjuration of his most powerful spell, the Divine Impact Yggdrasil. On the other side, Rick uses the simple air shot of the 1st composite nature to confront the golem. Fist to fist, they measure strength, but it's the giant golem that suffers the most, its structure gradually breaking apart until it explodes from the immense pressure from the opposite side. With that done, Raster falls defeated to the ground, and Rick proudly declares that his dream remains intact. After the victory, the Orichalcum Fist praises the pupil's performance, who finally understands that he has indeed become extremely powerful, something he didn't know until then. On the defeated side, Raster is consoled by his siblings until he appears before the Orichalcum Fist. Rick takes the opportunity to mock him, saying that an elite genius was crushed by a lowly commoner. Freed threatens to grumble, but Angelica tells him to stay put. Then Rick adds that he chose a few techniques to practice exhaustively instead of hundreds of useless powers, advising the noble to train a limited number of spells. Unconvinced, Raster warns the student that he will be his examiner in the next promotion test, and when that happens, he will crush the candidate. Finally, he continues to refer to Rick as third-rate and tells him to prepare for what's to come. Freed and Angelica run after their injured brother, but the girl pauses for a moment to greet Rick, something he never imagined possible. Later, the exam results were about to be announced, and the responsible person calls out the numbers of the promoted candidates one by one. Calmly, Rick waits for the numbers to be selected alongside Rionette and other examinees who, unlike the protagonist, were anxious. Meanwhile, Alice eats a meal with the other members of the Orichalcum Fist and asks if it's okay for them to be there before the announcement of those who passed, and they all reply that there's no need to worry. Rionette comments that Rick is calmer than she imagined, and he explains that he was just reminiscing about some things.